The annals of history are stained crimson, saturated with the blood of men and women who went to great lengths, even to their own martyrdom, to protect and preserve the word of Yahuwah. In 1947, the inevitable occurred. Shepherds found a library of scroll jars containing scripture in a cave by the Dead Sea in modern Qumran, with mostly scroll fragments, many scribed on leather. And we heard the voice in the wilderness crying out once again, the great prophet whose followers preserve the very original canon of Scripture. We are the God Culture, a group of independent researchers with no affiliation to any denomination nor organization whatsoever. Some say this isn't about salvation, so it doesn't matter. But to say so would actually be saying these men gave their lives for nothing. It would be to say prophecy has no importance, and those unaware of prophecy will be devoured by evil ultimately. We are to know our enemy and the gospel, all of it. And the gospel message starts in Genesis 1:1 and includes, we will prove, the very Book of Jubilees, which offers an incredible prophecy of Messiah, which we will cover for one. We read the word and we test it here. As 1 Thessalonians 5:21 tells us, prove all things, hold fast that which is good. In our journey to restore biblical geography in locating Ophir, Sheba, Tarshish, Havilah, the Garden of Eden, the rivers from Eden, and the land of creation, the research keeps expanding in other directions. It led to locating the lost tribes of Israel, but along the way, we discovered this book from the Dead Sea Scrolls, which far precedes that finding in history, in precedence, without doubt and indisputably so, and we will prove that in this video. The Book of Jubilees. At first, we just simply viewed it as history, as it is at least documented to the 2nd century BC. So, at the very least, there is certainly history that may be gleaned from it. We find directions all around the earth from Noah's division of the earth between his 3 sons. Thus, one of the titles of this book, which bears many titles in history, by the way. Actually, that title is the Book of Division, not because it promotes division, as some even erroneously have actually assumed. Who knows why? But it offers Noah's division of the earth. That's what division means, the days of Peleg, when the earth was divided. So being thorough, we mapped these out in our flood series, parts 3 and 4, and uncovered exact directions of all places to the very Garden of Eden. Exact, and from all 4 directions, and twice confirming itself. So, not something that when you're reading the Book of Jubilees, that you can really come to any other conclusion based on those. Some then say they do not understand why we would use Jubilees, because it's, well, not in the modern canon of Scripture. But let's be clear. That canon was chosen by the Catholic Church, which has never, nor ever will, have the authority to censor nor add one single book to the original canon of Scripture, especially not, as proved in Part 1, one chosen by John the Baptist and his followers as canon, Scripture, inspired in his library. We'll show you. But the question is, can we prove that? Well, we certainly proved John lived in Qumran, or its ancient name actually Bethabara in Greek or Betharaba in Hebrew. We cover that in Part 1 in great detail. Go take a look. Not just from actual maps, including the very oldest of ancient Israel in history, but also from the Bible itself, such as Joshua, who pinpointed the area as modern Qumran, basically in the same place, with specifics of the entire Dead Sea coast in order, going from north to south, and it's very, very obvious when you read it. But we do not have to rely on loose connections like that with this book. Oh no. It's time to get to the heart of the question. Is Jubilees Scripture, inspired, canon, and, by the way, as it says, it was written by Moses? If it passes this test, it is also Torah, which is not just 5 books of a Pentateuch, which is a new word, not a Bible word, one of the Pharisees really, but 6 books in such a case. Now, the Bible never says the Torah is 5 books. That originates with the Pharisees. One of the very shallow complaints leveled at Jubilees, and we're going to cover all of them that we can find in Part 3, or the third part of this, 3C it will probably be, is it adds to the Torah. Well, wait a minute. If Moses wrote it, then it is Torah. So how exactly can it add to itself? Of course, it can't. In fact, in the third video, we will address all of these concerns, and you will see for yourself just how unscholarly they really are, and how easy it is to overcome them with just a little research, really. In the next video, we will cover the abundant history documenting Jubilees in use as Scripture, not only in the days of John the Baptist, but even by Josephus, who uses it as geography, indisputably so, as there are references which do not originate anywhere in the Torah at all, nor anywhere in the Old Testament for that matter. And that was even before the Talmud or the Midrash or any of those documents that are actually Pharisee writings, which this is accused of, but we will address that in great detail in the third video, but we're going to get to the heart of that in this video, because to say it's written by a Pharisee, by the time you address this with Scripture, you are actually saying that the apostles were using Pharisee doctrine. No way. Then we will show you it was embraced by the so-called early church fathers all the way up until the Catholic Church banned it, following the Pharisees really, no longer including it in the canon of Scripture, no longer calling it inspired, but only as a whole, as some of the church fathers continued to use it as Scripture and inspired even so. No one can actually dispute that, but we'll show you the facts, and you can decide. Then we'll show you references to the book in Hebrew all the way up until the 1700s. So when the Oxford Dictionary claims it was not discovered in the Western world until about the 1800s or so, well, when found in Africa, we will prove that to be nothing less than fraudulent, or at least very uneducated, but If they've continued to leave this up for that long, it's fraud, based on actual writings within the church, which they should be aware of, or should at least do a little research before writing an article in an encyclopedia of such. But how do we test this in a way that we can once and for all settle this debate, or can we? Well, we aren't going to hold back, but in this video we will prove to you from the New Testament, yes, that there are very significant, groundbreaking doctrines, not just little references here and there. No. I'm talking about significant doctrines which derive not from anywhere in the Old Testament, even stretched references from the King James Version margin notes, which we'll cover as well, are fine to attempt association, showing scriptures that really in no way connect or only in very small part. But these doctrines, no, they come from one place and one place only. And we'll prove to you the Book of Jubilees. That is a major claim. We will prove it. By the end of the video, you will know. So if they do not originate in the Old Testament, where do they come from? One can say, well, John got that from Messiah himself directly. Yet the Bible is clear. It requires 2 witnesses to establish a matter. Even Messiah lived by that as he quoted Scripture much. In fact, we're finding today much more so than we ever imagined. This is not just a word association game like recently we viewed a video from the author of the Sefer Bible, actually claiming that every land with Dan, D-A-N, or D-E-N, or D-I-N, or D-U-N, or D-anything N, in their name, or even loosely so, associate as a land of the tribe of Dan, which is really ludicrous and unscholarly, really. We prove that in our Lost Tribes series, where we actually locate the lost tribes based on the Bible, which is far more specific and does not leave things to such chance and speculation and really just rather reckless scholarship, really. The Bible is very specific as to where these tribes headed and from where they would be scattered, but they still return only from those 3 regions in which they were originally scattered or migrated to. So they regather there first. Yes, the Bible is indeed that brilliant, and we're finding that all the time. Every time we go into deep research, we are just in awe of just how brilliant the Bible is. And you will be with this video as well, because Scripture is amazing. We aren't wasting your time with possible connections here, but we will go in this first video right to the meat. That's why we wanted to start here with this topic. Right to the heart of the matter. Is Jubilees recorded in Scripture as Scripture and inspired? Is doctrine, because that's what would be required, is doctrine literally derived, not just a little reference here, a little reference there, but is doctrine literally derived, indisputably so, from the Book of Jubilees, and nowhere else? Can this be isolated in such an instance? When you see this, it will change your paradigm. For those skeptics, you are welcome here too, and welcome to comment as long as you have actually reviewed the evidence first. No, nuh-uh is not an educated, coherent defense, but we welcome any challenges as well. This will be extremely strong evidence, though, and very well supported. Then, after we are done proving this out, we will explore the book itself and study it to even further test whether it truly is Scripture. We will not be done proving until all of that is done, but we will draw conclusions, because this video demands such, and you will see right out of the gates. That's how you test it. Not looking up a phony reference online in which the writer has never actually even read the book or has an obvious agenda. We've even seen a video where unfortunately it's a channel that we love and we really review most of their videos, and we really enjoy the way that they teach, their whole style, everything about them. But they put out a video called Testing the Book of Jubilees, and they just plain did not test it. That's all. To their credit, they're capable of testing it. They just did not. They looked up the references online, writings of Pharisees, and they just took what the Pharisees say at face value. We don't do that. We drill down, and we hope that they will too. We hope that they'll watch this video and it will open their eyes, because we know that they are capable of such. Again, this first video will be compelling proof enough for many, as it should be. See what you think. Here goes. The copies of the Books of Jubilees found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we'll show you the archaeology in the next video. This is just a quick, brief overview for context only. We will get into the detail in the next video. Are dated around the 2nd century BC. Notice we say copies as there are, and for any scholar to ignore the tradition of the scribe to copy over scrolls is really no scholar at all on the matter. All we know is when it was copied, because they found a copy, not the original, not when it originated, as those are not originals. This is how they claim this was written by a Pharisee, which we will prove already in this video, not even attempting to, but Scripture does, will prove that wrong. Because they date it to 160 BC. Yeah, 160, not 159. No, not 162. 160. Gotta be 160. Yet they can't date anything within less than a margin of error of about 100 years, a whole century when you add the two directions up. So no, they don't know that it was exactly 160 BC. And any scholarly article that's saying that is already committing really fraud. But within a century or so is all you can determine, which is good enough. It's fine. But no matter, because we are about to show you that John used Jubilees as doctrine. Ooh. Can we do that? You better believe it. And no way did he use Pharisee doctrine. That is absolute nonsense. No way. We will vet that out further, again, in the third video. 3C will probably be called. But the Book of Jubilees, which we will also cover, is known by many names in title, which is part of the reason for some confusion, but really not an excuse for especially scholars missing the significance of this book that you are going to know by the end of this video. The Book of Jubilees is an ancient Jewish, now it's not Jewish because the word Jew is not actually a Hebrew word, so that is an illegitimate word that never should appear in Scripture. It's Yahudim. Yahs would be the short. Not Jews, never Jews. There's no J in ancient Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, Latin, Old French, Old German, nor Old English until the 1500s. So it's a fraudulent word to ever use referring to any people of the Bible. So, an ancient Yahudim religious work of 50 chapters, considered canonical by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, as well as Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jews. So in Ethiopia, this is and has been canon all along. Is that good enough to say, oh, it's canon for me? No, we admit that, but that's okay. That's actually a side point, because we are going to prove it to you from Scripture itself, where it is known as the Book of Division. See, that's one of the names. Book of Division, Book of Jubilees, Book of the Times and Seasons, and divisions. It's all of these names are accurate names. It's just known by many titles. So thus some confusion, but again, it can be ironed out pretty easily. It was well known to early Christians, you better believe it, and we'll prove that out in the next video in great detail, with dates even, and actual excerpts, as evidenced by the writings of Epiphanius, Justin Martyr, Origen, Diodorus of Tarsus, Isidore of Alexandria, Isidore of Seville, Eutychius of Alexandria, John Malalas, George Syncellus, and George Kedronos. Actually, I think that's spelled different in most references. The text was also utilized by the community that originally collected the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yes, it certainly was as Scripture. Again, just a brief overview, but we will cover the history in great detail next. Just a little context first. Why is this book called Jubilees? Because a Jubilee is either a 7 or 49-year period in Scripture, and this literally breaks down really from creation, because the first 7 days are the first Jubilee 7-day period. So yeah, I can even refer to days. The order of, and the Sabbath, of course, being the 7th day, that's how that breaks down. The order of Yahuwah's creation, Adam and Eve cycles, all in 7-year periods, and that is purposeful. It deals with many things that explain Genesis, especially in terms of time, seasons, and jubilees, but even the law, it's there, as well as Noah's division, thus the book of division. Not that it creates division. Some people have actually said that. No. Of the entire earth. Yes, we plotted out on a map. It's amazing. Of all books of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and no, do not lump anything together. You can't do that. You test each individually, and we will in this series. This one, the Book of Jubilees, has by far the most beneficial content, so much so that we will just say it. Without it, you will misunderstand the Torah, especially Genesis. There are several things we have discovered along the way, which you will find Jubilees clarifies, that we have been reading wrong, in fact, in general, in the church especially. It does not disprove Genesis, no. It clarifies it. It proves it. It confirms it, in fact. But we have misread some passages, which we will probably produce an entire video just on that topic alone, as whole doctrines have come from that gray area in Genesis that's being exploited, but Genesis doesn't cover that. Why? Because Jubilees does. And Jubilees was there to qualify and clarify. And we no longer have had that in general as far back as at least my lifetime goes, right? You will find the Qumran community kept in a scroll jar, the Book of Jubilees, alone with Genesis, not in any sense, considering it a lesser Genesis, which is another fraudulent name that's been given by supposed scholars, as one of the titles, as it actually improperly is even larger than the book of Genesis, really. So that doesn't actually even make sense. Jubilees fills these holes, though, and without it, Genesis is left rather incomplete. Still Scripture, still a wonderful book, absolutely, and much can be gleaned from it, absolutely. It is Torah, it is Scripture, and we don't question that for a second. But the Book of Jubilees completes it, and we will prove that in this series. Now, that's a hefty claim, we know, but we say it with confidence because we know what these next videos, especially these next 3, are going to produce. And beyond, we will conclude, as we have conducted a full parallel study with Genesis and Jubilees. And we now say Genesis is incomplete without it, with all confidence. Review the evidence and see if you agree, not based on shallow articles, but a real testing. Now, here we go. More context. This confirmed by many sources, but we're going to quote one book for now, just for context. Again, the next video will be history. of Jubilees. With 14 or 15 attested copies, the Book of Jubilees is undoubtedly one of the best documented texts of the Qumran library. Moreover, it is cited as an authoritative source, yes it is, in a sectarian work, so a local writing of the community basically. The Damascus document, which is the name they gave it, whether appropriate or not. And seems to have been equally important to the Qumran community. Now, can we prove this beyond just saying so? Let's see what the Qumran community had to say about Jubilees, and then we'll go into the scriptures. Now this is already huge. From the complete Dead Sea Scrolls by Giza Vermes, one of the most respected of publications translating these scrolls, right from the Damascus document, so named, found in Qumran, which is one of the local writings accompanied by the scrolls used by the community. So this is where they're defining largely their community, their doctrines, etc. See, they have commentaries, which are not Scripture, and this is not Scripture, but it's a writing that follows along, just as any community would, just as a church would have even today. But still valuable. And to say they are adding to Scripture, which some people actually go there, yes, and they call themselves scholars, by writing commentaries, especially coming from a scholar selling books where he does exactly that, basically, is not only hypocritical, but they prove themselves wrong by even talking as if their point were true. They have no right to write commentaries today either, would they? But we don't mind them doing so because there's nothing wrong with it. And the Qumran community had theirs and other writings, and rightfully so. Just as an author writes a book today, no, it will never be Bible, but it doesn't mean that it's not beneficial. Obviously, we can learn from those, but they are not Scripture. We agree. Now, let's read this, though, because this tells you their position on the Book of Jubilees, which they specify. For Yahuwah made a covenant with you and all Israel. Therefore, a man shall bind himself by oath to return to the law of Moses, for in it all things are strictly defined. As for the exact determination of their times, to which Israel turns a blind eye, behold, it is strictly defined. Defined in what? Well, number one, a document, a writing, a book, actually is what it says, that Israel turns a blind eye to in this era. What's that? Well, it wouldn't be the Torah, would it? And by the way, this is quoting this as a part of, as support for, and really as Torah, as law. It says, behold, it is strictly defined. What language? Man. Strictly defined in the book of the divisions of the times into their jubilees and weeks. What is that? That is the book of Jubilees, the book of divisions, the book of times. What exact determination? Strictly defined in this book pertaining to the law of Moses and its times in Jubilees? What? Why is this not in any of the articles we have ever reviewed on this topic? We're not finding it. Well, nothing within this entire video will likely look familiar based on just reading those. They stay on the surface, they stay in the scholarly paradigm, they quote each other, and they never bother to actually research it. If you conducted a quick internet search on this, that is what you will find, a controlled narrative, which comes in clear view if you actually read Jubilees and test it to see if it should be treated as Scripture. But they just reject it without investigation whatsoever, really. For the most part, there are a few that were translators who early on made some of these conclusions And that is what many of them are basing them on. But just because they translated it has no bearing on whether or not they're actually telling even the truth about it being a Pharisee narrative, which it cannot be, because it condemns not only the Pharisee calendar very specifically, but Pharisee doctrine, but more so. What we're about to show you would then have those scholars, now they wouldn't come out and say this, but what they are saying is that the very apostles themselves are quoting the Pharisees, are using Pharisee doctrine by which to establish theirs, including in regards to Messiah of all things. Yeah, the Pharisees did not worship Messiah. Give me a break. There is no connection there. And we're going to put an end to that, and we're going to research this for ourselves. And on that day that a man swears to return to the law of Moses, the angel of persecution, or Mastema, Prince Mastema, is the name for Satan in Jubilees, which basically has the same meaning as Satan, which is adversary. Some even accuse, and it's persecution. So adversary, persecution, yeah, that's the same angel. That is the fallen angel. That is Satan. Some even accuse Jubilees of making up a new character in regards to this Prince Mastema. No, it's Satan. That is ignorance. Shall cease to follow him, provided he fulfills his word. For this reason, Abraham circumcised himself on the day that he knew. And that portion you do find in Genesis as well. And you find that the back and forth between Jubilees and Genesis is indisputable and undeniable. The two books complement each other and support each other without doubt. So yes, this is a direct quote from the Qumran community from the Book of Jubilees, even citing the book by its really long title, which covers multiple names we find in history, and this is added on top of the fact that Jubilees was the number 6 most numerous scroll found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. What exactly is this saying? At least the Qumran community of John the Baptist, we prove, who were in no way Essene, no Essenes in this narrative, none, nor is there any Essene archaeology whatsoever, not one shred, yet a gold mine of Essene artifacts 25 miles south of there found in Ein Gedi called the Essene Find. Duh. Gee, I wonder where the Essenes lived. It's amazing that scholars can't quite want to see that. They don't want to see that. That's the problem. Jubilees was treated as scripture. There is no question of that in this reference. And by the way, when they do so, they are calling it Torah, as it was written by Moses. And this reference goes further by even identifying the Book of Jubilees as representing the law of Moses and its exact determination of its times. Now, we are going to show you references no one likely has, which clearly support and confirm this in the New Testament canon. Yes, we said that, and when you see this, your mind will be blown. Here, though, this book has been here, right under our noses all along, and obscured by unscholarly language, which hasn't even bothered to look up these references in the Bible, which were not that hard to find. Yes, it was a research project, took some time, but not that hard to find at all. And see if they can find it there. They don't even try. We find it, and this will be clear. Now, we are already in groundbreaking territory. But before we enter the New Testament, one more confirmation that Jubilees was scripture and Torah to the community of John the Baptist. See, then scholars have to justify just exactly how they can place the wishes of Pharisees and Catholic Pharisees over that of John the Baptist. Yeah, because that's what they're doing. You know, the great prophet whose voice cried out in the wilderness yet again in 1947, That is what happened. Oh yeah, and then there is evidence from the New Testament they must contend with, which we have never seen in any commentary thus far before. Perhaps someone has gone here, maybe, but we haven't seen it. Also in the Damascus document of the Qumran scrolls, no man over the age of 60 shall hold office as judge of the congregation. For, and this is a direct quote from the Book of Jubilees, because man sinned, his days have been shortened. By the way, that also clarifies Genesis. There are some out there trying to say that when Yahuwah says that man's days would be shortened to 120 years, they actually then try to say, well, that means 120 years until the flood. Jubilees confirms that that is not what it's saying. It's saying that man's days, his lifespan, is shortened. And in the heat of his anger against the inhabitants of the earth, God ordained that their understanding should depart even before their days are completed. Jubilees 23, chapter or verse 2. So, this is a direct quote using Jubilees as scripture in the determination of establishing judges of the congregation, which, by the way, is the biblical edict set forth by Moses. Not Essenes, but not the modern legal system, as the modern system has been seasoned with thousands of years of leaven. Yes, it is a Pharisee system. The entire legal system, the entire system of laws, the entire system of IRS, accounting, whatever you want to call it, and the entire system of government, constitutions especially. They are expanded, which is what leaven does, such as yeast, which is leaven, causes bread to expand and then rise. That is why you see legal systems, tax codes, and even constitutions which continue to inflate and expand, because that is the Pharisee system. And they do not take credit, they do take credit in their own writings, in the Jewish Encyclopedia and others, if you look up Pharisee, for that system, and for constitutions even, by the way. And then you can look up the U.S. and find out that the very day it was established in 1776, July 4th, is actually the very day that Moses destroyed the golden calf. Imagine that. Not a day to be celebrated by the tribes of Israel, but maybe those who aren't. So, was this scripture to the Qumran community? Absolutely. 100%. Firmly, it was. Now, that is already a problem, as no pope nor Christian leader can be compared with John the Baptist, thus changing his canon of Scripture, which this library would represent, in which we now have full documentation in his time capsule preserved in the caves of Qumran. Is very problematic to any traditional line attempting to suppress books considered scripture by John. And by the way, Yahusha even visited and was baptized there, which could be considered a further endorsement, in fact. You cannot say that about the Council of Nicaea or any of the other councils. Yahusha was not there, and believe me, not in any sense whatsoever, as they eliminated the Book of Jubilees and others, which was Scripture, inspired, and canon, as you see from these references, up until that point, which we will drill down on that much further. So as far as we are concerned, it has remained so, because we don't recognize that any of them had the authority to judge otherwise. We are just warming up now for the real test. What does Scripture say about the Book of Jubilees? And more specifically, and more importantly, not just some veiled reference that someone tries to say, oh, see, that's Jubilees. Or, oh, it uses the word Jubilees, which is a Bible word used many times. No, absolute nonsense. We don't do that. Does it derive doctrine from doctrine in the Book of Jubilees? Because if it is in fact Torah, that would have to be the case. Now, this, and we're going to start with a big one right away. This is good. Enter John chapter 1. One of the very pillars of modern doctrine, dogma, whichever you wish to call it, among believers today. There is more meat in this these 3 verses than any modern commentary could ever claim, really. One of the greatest revelations in all of Scripture. But what is its origin? Where did it come from? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, Elohim. The same was in the beginning with God, Elohim. All things were made by Him. That's huge. And without Him was not anything made that was made. Now it goes on later in the same passage to identify, and you know this, that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And let's be clear, that is not Yahuwah the Father, it is only the Son, Yahusha, who was God, Elohim, in the flesh. Now that is specifically who is being referenced here as participating in creation, that all things were made by Him. And He is the Word. He is not only with Elohim, Yahuwah, He is Elohim. This is a massive revelation, but we challenge every scholar, and John for that matter. Where is his second witness to this? Remember, it takes 2 witnesses out of the mouth of 2 witnesses. Shall a matter be established? The ramifications are far too encompassing to not have a second witness. So where is John's second witness? Sure, one can say he got it from Messiah directly, but that still requires a second witness, because Yahushua quotes Scripture. Now, the KJV margin notes anchor this reference to a couple of Old Testament references, so let's take a look at them and see where they lead. Is that where this doctrine originates? Or is John coming up with new doctrine here, which is problematic if not confirmed somewhere in Scripture, right? Well, scholars really should pick up on this if they haven't. Only a stretching of a whole bunch of Scriptures could one attempt the mental gymnastics that it would require to make it to that point. You just can't do it. And the KJV falls way short on this link. Let's look at how the KJV links Psalm 33:6, which says, "By the word of the Lord, Yahuwah, were the heavens made." Wait. By the word of Yahuwah were the heavens made. Stop. Does it say that the word of the Lord is Yahusha? Because it would have to make that connection to be the real source of this entire passage, of the whole doctrine. Because that's not the doctrine, that's only a small piece of it. But where's the big part? Where's the largest part of this whole Scripture? You don't find it in Psalm 33. And this is interesting, and all the host of them, by the breath of His mouth. So He also created all the hosts of them. Host of them? What is that? Who are the hosts of heaven, by the way? That would be the angels. Think about it. Some say the Bible never mentions the origin of angels, but that is wrong. And in fact, it's not only found in this passage right here that you're looking at, but That is another doctrine confirmed in the Book of Jubilees and nowhere else in the Old Testament. As Jubilees says, the angels were created on the first day of creation. Now, for the well-known scholar out there trying to place angels as being participants in creation, that is never in Scripture. And we aren't even going there, but interesting to think about. But does this make the connection in doctrine that John is espousing here? Does it say the word of Yahuwah is Messiah Yahusha, and that he participated in creation, that through him all things were made? Where is that in Psalm 33? It's not there. See, because that is what John is saying. Not just a little piece of it. That is the significance of this verse above all. And it's not in Psalm 33. Does it truly tie as the origin of what John said? No. It does not, only in small part, which is fine that it's a reference and an anchor. There's nothing wrong with that. We're not criticizing the KJV. What we're saying is it's missing the greatest part, the greatest origin of this doctrine. But not the massive, groundbreaking conclusion John draws, which must have origins in Scripture. Search the Old Testament for yourself. The KJV did, and this is the best they got in this instance. And it falls way short, only confirming a piece of the revelation, yet missing the most important elements. So, not it. Don't worry, it does have firm, solid foundations in Scripture. Don't worry, we're going to show you that. But you need to know what Scripture is. This is very solid doctrine, indeed. No one can dispute that. But the point is valid. Then, the KJV links Proverbs 8, which we encourage you to read the whole chapter, but we'll show you the beginning context, which is verse 1. Doth wisdom cry, and understanding put forth her voice. Now the whole passage follows after this is about wisdom and understanding. Not the word being Messiah. It's not there. And his creating all things. Again, monumental assumption on John's part. How can he do this? Because it's not good enough to say, oh, Messiah said so. Well, yeah, he said so, but where does it come from in Scripture? How is it supported? Because it is. We'll show you. You will not find that there, though. This is impertinent, in fact, to the point, and really doesn't even fit very well as a link to the Scripture at all, but okay that it's there, really not a problem. So here we are at a loss for an origin of this earth-shattering doctrine, largely, which is truth. We don't dispute that. We're going to prove to you it is. But how do we prove it? It does not truly anchor in the modern Old Testament. And that is a problem where scholars chose to see it or not. It's a problem for their thinking on this matter. Let's go a little deeper into John as well, and we'll bring this home. John 5. Yahusha says to the Pharisees, do not think that I will accuse you to the Father. There is one that accuseth you, even Moses, in whom you trust. For had ye believed Moses, ye would have believed me, for he wrote of me. What? Moses wrote of Messiah? Well, let's find it. But if you believe not his writings, how shall ye believe my words? So two things here. What writings do the Pharisees not use nor believe? Because they do use the Torah. They twist it. They leaven it, no doubt. But the Pentateuch, the 5 books that are called the Torah today, have been used by the Pharisees all along. They expand it with their Talmud, their oral traditions. They ruin it. They wreck it. They make it of none effect, Messiah says in Mark 7. But nevertheless, they use it. So what part of it do they not use? We'll discuss this. They claim to believe the Torah, though they have expanded it into something else. Moses wrote of Messiah, but where? Okay, now, in Genesis 3:15, and this also according to the KJV, although we immediately went to the same one, this is definitely a prophecy of Messiah, no doubt, no doubt. We aren't disputing that. The question is does it connect directly? And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Excellent prophecy indeed, but does this fit? Is this really a fit? Well, sure, it does, some, but nowhere near as well as what we are about to show you. Is this a messianic prophecy? Yes, absolutely, indisputably, but not as direct as what you are about to see. It doesn't come out and say it. Not like this. Now also, it cites Deuteronomy 18 in a couple of scriptures, mentions that Yahuwah will raise up a prophet, and it's in there twice, but it's odd. This is linked to Messiah, yet all did not hearken to his voice, and this says all will. And he was not a prophet. Messiah was not, he prophesied, but he did not come just merely as a prophet. He's the Messiah. He's the Son of the living Elohim, the very Son of Yahuwah. So, no matter, these are better than the John 1 connection. We'll give them that, and we'll even give them a check on these. That's okay, because we don't need it, because we're really covering John 1 here, which has no possible origin in the Old Testament we just showed you. But see if this better fits even this. And what book did the Pharisees ban, which was Torah? Well, what writings of Moses are they missing in their doctrines and have been all along? The Book of Jubilees. That's what. So, really, John 1, back to that. This is John 5, but back to John 1. Indisputably, from Jubilees. John 5 strongly inferred, and even the doctrine of the creation of the heavenly hosts or angels inferred in this passage originates in Jubilees. Let's see it. Now that's a grand slam, and just the first scriptures we're showing you in this series. Now for Jubilees. Let's see what it says. Jubilees 16:26. Check this out. And he, Abraham, blessed his Creator who had created him in his generation, for he had created him according to his good pleasure. For he knew and perceived that from him, from Abraham, would arise the plant of righteousness for the eternal generations. Who's that? Only Messiah could possibly fit that, and no one else. This is a very direct and prophecy of Messiah with specificity, but we're not done. This gets better. Read further. And from him, Abraham, a holy seed, so that it should become like him who made all things. Wow. Exact language. Him who had made all things. I'm speechless. Wow. Now who's that? According to this passage, it is Messiah, indisputably. You are looking at the origin of John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, Elohim. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. There is no disputing this. Immediately it connects with perfection, and nothing in the Old Testament does. Then look at John 5 in this context and understand. When Moses wrote of him, Yahusha, this is Moses writing about him. The prophecy in Jubilees is specific and fits like a glove. This is what he is referring to, not the more vague prophecies from Genesis 3 and from the garden, nor Deuteronomy 18. Now we understand, look, the KJV had what it had to go by. And their attempt is not bad, and they're making a link that still is legitimate, but it is not a full link to the origin of this full doctrine. It's just not there. But it's found only in Jubilees. Why? Because Yahuwah is just that brilliant to preserve his word, his scripture, and the proofing of it. And we find this all the time. Now, they pale, these references from the KJV, they pale in comparison. But again, the John 1 connection essentially settles this on its own. And the whole argument, for that matter, the whole debate, is Jubilee Scripture? Settled already. There is no other origin in Scripture for John 1. And this is an indisputable origin indeed. Jubilees is inspired, ladies and gentlemen. Just read this prophecy and tell us that that prophecy is not inspired. And all the references that we share in this video and the rest as we go through, you will find the same. It is Scripture. It is canon from the prophet who matters and who had the authority to choose the canon, which the Catholic Church, nor the Protestant Church, nor the Pharisees have ever produced a biblical prophet of this like in any sense. Nor will they. And yes, you can add up the credentials of an entire council and all of the councils combined at any point, which are meaningless in the comparison of the one whom Messiah called the great prophet, John the Baptist, whose library and compound was in Qumran. We prove that in part 1. Could there be more, though? We know you have likely never heard anything like this. We haven't. But it is because no one is truly seeking this out, perhaps the way we have. We want the truth, and we care not whom it may offend. We are all being deceived on some level, and it's time we discern and research for ourselves so we cannot be deceived anymore. And then we will be set free, and free indeed. In Mark 3, the Pharisees call Satan the prince of devils, and Ephesians calls him the prince of the air. Paul calls him that. Where in the Old Testament does it ever refer to Satan as a prince? It does not. The origin of this title is Jubilees, the chief of spirits, mastema. By the way, again, that is the same exact word as Satan. Satan means adversary, and mastema means persecution, because he's the one who persecutes the body day and night, in fact, before the throne of Yahuwah, according to Revelation. And Satan is called Prince Mastema. Here are just two references, but there are more in Jubilees. That title comes from the Book of Jubilees, and it is being quoted in these two instances. John 14 appears to be quoting the Book of Jubilees as well when he says that the Comforter will bring all things to your remembrance. Again, not the biggest example, but a compelling one we also found during our research we thought we would share. There are many far more compelling, but that's fine. In Acts 7, Luke identifies that from the time he came to Midian to the time of the burning bush on Mount Sinai, that time for Moses was 40 years. Now, this is not the 40 years in the wilderness. That didn't happen yet. Moses didn't go to Egypt and say, let my people go yet. So that's after. But this is Moses kills a man in Egypt when he's prince of Egypt, basically. And he flees into Midian. That period starts then. And then Yahuwah appears to him in the burning bush. That period is also 40 years, according to Luke here in Acts, which, by the way, is also on Mount Sinai, the burning bush is, which is in Midian, not a peninsula in Egypt. We're not going to go there, but that is easy to prove too. Before re-entering Egypt, to say, "Let my people go," Moses was in Midian preparing for 40 years. You will not find that figure in the entire Torah, nor anywhere else. Yes, 40 years in the wilderness later, but that's a different period. That is not the same. And that is not what Luke is referring to here. He is talking about Moses living in Midian for 40 years. This is not found in the Old Testament, which makes sense because Jubilees is the book of times, seasons, and Jubilees. But only in Jubilees will you find this 42 years, which is what Luke is talking about. Here's one that scholars try to use to beat up on Jubilees even. It's amazing, forgetting that Scripture actually affirms Jubilees on this. And here it is. Moses received the law by the disposition of angels. What? Where's that in the Torah? And the Israelites have not kept it. You will never find anything in the Torah mentioning that Moses received the law by the disposition of angels. You will not find it. But you'll find that Yahuwah gave the law of Moses, the law to Moses. Now, is Luke wrong? Is he confused? No. So where did he get this from? Now here's Exodus, and it has nothing about an angel. Nothing. Not as far as Moses receiving the law from an angel. Not there. This comes from the Book of Jubilees. And even the second part of the verse is there as well. Again, another monumental, massive discovery here. Luke is not just quoting Jubilees here. Remember what part of the Bible we're talking about. This is Torah. This is distinctive. Here it is, Jubilees 126, and he said to the angel of the presence, write for Moses, from the beginning of creation till my sanctuary has been built among them for all eternity. Hello, those scholars who attempt to dismiss Jubilees. Based on this, you're ignoring Scripture, which confirms Jubilees' claim. See, they go to find this confirmed in the Torah, and it's not there. And that is true, it's not. But it is reaffirmed in the New Testament. Are they accusing Luke of adding to the Torah? They better not be. He is not, yet he is not quoting the modern Pentateuch Torah, is he? Nor all of the Old Testament. He is quoting the Book of Jubilees here. And this is monumental. This is huge. Now it also deals with the second portion of the verse as well, and they will forget all my law and all my commandments and all my judgments. Again, this is doctrine from Torah Jubilees, that an angel is involved in disseminating the law of Moses. This is groundbreaking, yet originates in Jubilees. If not, then Luke is wrong. And that is the only other option. This one not only endorses Jubilees as Scripture, but most definitely Torah. By the way, do these verses in Jubilees look scary to you at all? Does anything look awry? Do they look like something that you are not supposed to even read or glance at? Or do they in fact look inspired? Of course they do. Let's keep going. In 2 Corinthians, Paul comes out with what could be considered a somewhat foreign doctrine here to the Old Testament, or at least the term. at least in direct reference. Did he take that editorial license? Is he making something new up? Or is this a concept of a new and righteous nature of the origin of Jubilees? Remember, salvation is not a New Testament concept only. That's erroneous. As even the strangers among the tribes of Israel were to abide by the law and share in its benefits, thus salvation was available to even the Goyim, even then, and still is. It is never about blood according to Scripture. The KJV margin shows Isaiah 43 is the origin of this, but it is not remotely the origin, because it's not discussing this new and righteous nature. It attaches to the Scripture, to the verse, yes, but not to this new and righteous nature, a new creature, a new creation, however you want to say it, which is an exact match with Jubilees. New creation, new and righteous nature. That makes sense. Yes, Isaiah links the old things passed away, and Yahuwah's doing a new thing, but that's not a new and righteous nature. It's not a new creation. That's not what that says. So it's not specifying this nature that comes from the Book of Jubilees, which is the origin of Paul's doctrine here, and a big one. Paul, as well as John and Luke, are using doctrine from the Book of Jubilees, in this case, mixing with Isaiah, in fact, which is very appropriate as the two books are both Scripture, inspired, and canon. Even the phrase in Galatians 2, sinners of the Gentiles, has no root ever mentioned in the entire Old Testament, not even the New for that matter otherwise. Paul needs a second witness, and he has it from Scripture, from Jubilees 23:23. That is its origin. In Romans 9, Paul uses the term children of the living God. Now, this is definitely similar to Hosea 1, sons of the living God. Indeed, no doubt. Yet, the likely origin of really both of these references, and an exact match to what Paul is using as the term, is the ancient Book of Jubilees, chapter 1, verse 24, which is the exact verbiage used by Paul, children of the living God. Not just close, exact. Paul quoted Jubilees, not Hosea. And what about these prophecies that deal with the son of perdition? We've all heard that in John 17 in Thessalonians. Paul again. It is not used, not this term, son of perdition, in the entire Old Testament. However, its root is in Scripture, the Book of Jubilees 10:3. And notice this is a reference to the Nephilim before the flood, which brings some clarity to the matter. Those who were modified in the same term is being applied to the coming beast. Why? Because he will have Nephilim blood, Nephilim origins in some fashion, making him a son of perdition, the same sons of perdition that were destroyed by the flood. Again, why can we not find that in all of Scripture? Yet there it is in Jubilees. It's there, the anchor, the origin. Many go to Enoch, which is more controversial, and even try to lump Jubilees in with the likes of Jasher, which Jasher has not one shred of support to actually be Scripture, other than a mention in Scripture of the book of Jasher. But the modern one, created likely in the 1500s or so, has no precedence, has not in any way been established as Scripture, and is not likely the origin of the book mentioned in Scripture as the book of Jasher, because it's infused with occult principles, like Enoch being transformed into an archangel, as if Michael is not doing his duties and needed help by a human because he is not angelic enough, I guess. He needs the help of a man. And that's completely against the very doctrine that Yahuwah destroyed the Nephilim because they were created. The very next verse after the Nephilim were created, or procreated really, they're not created. After they were procreated, immediately Yahuwah responds that he is going to replenish the earth. That's his response to that doctrine, and you're going to accuse Yahuwah of going against his own law of creation by turning Enoch into an archangel, which he does not need? Nonsense. Enoch was conducted into the Garden of Eden, according to the Book of Jubilees. And he is still there to this day and will be until the day of final judgment. Now that makes a lot more sense. And that matches Genesis, which never says he goes to heaven. It didn't say he walked to heaven. I know we teach that in Sunday school. That is never what it says in Scripture. He walked with God, and he was not, for Yahuwah took him. It doesn't say that he took him to heaven. Jubilee says he took him to the Garden of Eden. That's where he took him. So no, that's strange doctrine in Jasher, which you will not find in Jubilees. Jubilees stands on its own and has more significance as if Moses wrote it, it's Torah. Of all the books we're going to review, that's why we're starting with this one first, even above Enoch. This is Torah, if it proves out, and thus far it certainly is. For those saying it adds to the Torah, when it is Torah, it cannot add to Torah. Think about it. James said, the brother of Yahusha, actually Yaakov or Jacob, because we still question where there's even a V for a bet vet, because there's no way to distinguish in ancient Hebrew between the two. So likely Jacob, and Jacob is actually much closer to accurate. But that was his name. His name was never James. Probably because of King James it got changed, who knows. James said Abraham was called the friend of God, of Elohim. Now, it is similar to 2 Chronicles, which says the seed of Abraham, thy friend. Kind of a reference, but not the same. In Genesis, we find the same verse as in Jubilees, but it omits the friend of God. But in Jubilees, here we go, we find that Abraham is in fact exact same 4 words, the friend of God, exact title. Remember, even to a skeptic, Jubilees was at least written in 160 BC. That's before Paul, before John, before James, before Peter, and even Messiah. So, one would have to explain if, in fact, this book, which is clearly being quoted in the New Testament many times, and as doctrine even, that somehow those scholars are accusing the apostles of following Pharisee doctrine when they say a Pharisee wrote Jubilees, which is ludicrous and unscholarly of them. However, they wouldn't know because they have not truly tested this book for most of these scholars. There are a couple that were interpreters, but again, that does not qualify them to make the judgment that because this was somehow dated as a copy in the 2nd century BC, which is not necessarily 160, by the way, where they try to fix it to. It just doesn't make sense. They wouldn't know. They are trained to dismiss and deny, not research nor prove, which is limited for them largely to their little scholarly circle anyway, which ensures they never leave that controlled paradigm, even though they may be good men and mean well. We're not saying anything about their character or anything else. They're just programmed into this paradigm. just as you and I are. We all are. Time to break that. That is how Satan operates, because he's not omnipotent. He can't be everywhere. So he has to have control systems. It's time to squash that control system. Peter then comes out and recites Jubilees 4:30 when he says, "One day is with the Lord, Yahuwah, as 1,000 years." The KJV anchors it to Psalm 90, which is not quite exact, but Jubilees is exact. And read this verse. Does it look like something that is not Scripture to you? And he lacked 70 years of 1,000 years. This is talking about Adam. For 1,000 years are as one day in the testimony of the heavens. Is that not the same? And therefore was it written concerning the tree of knowledge, on the day that you eat thereof, ye shall die. For this reason he, Adam, did not complete the years of this day, the 1,000 years, for he died during it. So Adam lived just shy of one day, or 1,000 years, in the time of heaven, in the time of Yahuwah, confirmed by Genesis as 930 years as well, indeed. So you have Genesis and Jubilees confirming each other, which you will find far more often, and we'll see. Yeah, we know how sacrilegious for Jubilees to confirm the age of Adam from Genesis as its second witness, which of all books, because it has not always had a second witness, at least not that we maybe knew of at the time. But because of that, it has been chopped apart by so-called scholars and Pharisees who do not believe it. They deny creation and the flood. They have all kinds of wild theories that inject scientism and all kinds of things to try to make it kind of work, but really what they're doing is operating from a point of disbelief. And some, even the very deity of Messiah, and there are cults today that are following modern translations, are right down that path. And Jubilees even proves whom Messiah is. We showed you that prophecy. It is incredible. All of these are found in the Book of Jubilees, confirming Genesis, just as Peter warned in 2 Peter 3 would happen in the last days. He calls them scoffers, not scholars, scoffers. That's what we should call those particular ones, not all scholars, but the ones that don't even believe the Bible, who are trying to justify, as Peter says, their own lusts. That's what Peter says. And if the shoe fits. So what have we learned here? The Dead Sea Scrolls say and demonstrate that Jubilees is Scripture, inspired, Canon, and Torah. And we will show you that trend continues in other scholars, even beyond that point. And so does the New Testament, which derives actual doctrine, very large principles, which do not come from any other part of the Torah nor the entire Old Testament, but from Jubilees. That's no small thing. And we issue this challenge to modern scholarly paradigms to actually read this book and test it, not based on Pharisee so-called insight or such and such a book that so-and-so wrote. Fine, read those. But then go into the Bible and find out. What does it say? Go and confirm these. Test it, not based on Pharisee nonsense. It will not harm you a bit, but it will change your paradigm, and insight will follow as the full Torah will now become clear. And right now you are reading only 5/6 of the Torah. That's pretty important, and that is a major thing to overlook, that at least demands you research this further, at least. With Jubilees, Genesis is not only confirmed, but clarified. such as the notion that, and we'll cover these in detail, showing you the passages, parallel, and we'll go through the whole books, such as the notion that Cain and Abel are twins. No, they're not. They were born 7 years apart. Cain is called by some the seed of the serpent. Well, major problem. He wasn't even born until 7 years after the Garden of Eden, thus not the son of Satan from the Garden of Eden. Unless Eve was pregnant for 7 years, no. Nor did Eve have relations with Satan in any of Scripture. That's a big, big stretch from one obscure definition that even comes out and says it's not about sex. But instead, even Genesis says, Adam knew her and she conceived. Where's Satan in that? It's not. And then she has the child and thanks Yahuwah. Well, she should be thanking Satan if it's his, right? It's not, nor did she bear twins. It settles this new theory of an alternative creation, trying to fill in the gray area, asking the question, well, where did Cain's wife come from? I mean, who did Cain marry? Where are these other people? So now we have to go and fill a whole doctrine of where these other people came from. Well, it's crystal clear. In Jubilees, he married his sister Awan. And before someone calls that incest, how else was he to procreate at that point in history? And no, the Bible does not ever say anything against that at that point, but encourages it. Be fruitful and multiply. And understand, he was the first son, thus pure in DNA, and we are copies far down the line, thousands of years later, with more corrupted DNA, which is actually proven by science. And we aren't evolving, but the other way around, according to actual science. And so much more. Even Abraham is recorded in more detail, and this book begins to prophesy of Messiah in ways that you don't find in the Torah. And it is amazing. And that's before he came, even if it was written in 160 BC, which it wasn't, long before. We'll also deal with that. So, it was at least written before he was born. Thus, still prophecy. There's so much. So next, we will test the history. Then we will take on the opposition, head-to-head, standing against Jubilees on a platform of nothing, really, you'll see. So far, Jubilees passes the first test. Scripture refers to it as Scripture, inspired, Canon, and even Torah, and derives doctrine from it. That is the critical key to this, and that is indisputable. And that's really enough to at least read this book and get to know it. There is nothing harmful there, but we will take you through a study on the entire book over time, following this testing. Thank you for watching our original Canon series. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to click the bell, or just click the next screen. Share this video with others, and check out our website at thegodculture.com. Always remember to prove all things for yourself. Yahuwah bless all.